Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's college basketball webcast. This is sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, since last we spoke to the good folks watching the webcast, Missouri, I think, pretty much punched their ticket to the NCAA tournament. They beat Colorado at home, lose by 10 at K-State, and then beat Iowa State on the road in kind of a very entertaining game, at least late in the game, in overtime, 69-67. In that game, Zaire Taylor sort of cements his legacy, I think, as maybe one of the best clutch players in Missouri history by yet again hitting the game-winning shot, kind of a coast-to-coast with 6 seconds left in overtime. But even before that, basically making sure the game went into overtime with 2 big shots, one big shot at the end of regulation and one to tie the game up before winning it. So just maybe your thoughts on what goes into making a player. What does he have that makes him such a good clutch player?
Well, first off, the amazing part about that was that those were the only 3 shots he made in the game. I mean, he was having a bad night.
And they were all sort of ridiculous shots in one shape or another. Yeah.
And he saves them all for the end. I asked Matt Zimmerman, Missouri's assistant coach, after the game if he's ever remembered a guy who was that clutch and hit that many memorable shots. And he said he had some guys when he was a high school coach in Arkansas that, had a knack for that, but not at the college level. And I don't know what it is. He's had some opportunities, obviously, the last 2 years to come through in those situations. He's had the ball in his hands, but he seems to always deliver. I think the thing that Zaire has working for him, he's a really patient guy. He's not going to get rattled. He's not going to get out of control in those situations. He never gets really out of control. He might have some turnovers in games, but they're not the JT Taylor type turnovers where you see him sometimes put his head down and put himself in a bad spot. He might make a bad pass, but he's under control all the time. I think he's got an advantage getting off a shot over some guys because he's 6'4" and he's got long arms. He's strong with the ball, and I think there's this intangible about him. Something maybe that Zimmerman suggested, maybe something that comes out of New York City, that he's able to get off some weird-looking shots, scoop shots, floaters. He just has a knack for getting a shot off in traffic. It's an innate quality, and I don't know where it comes from, but maybe somewhere in Staten Island he picked it up.
I wonder if he has played a lot of playground games, because the shots against Iowa State were not jump shots. I mean, it was weird. He was scooping it up, throwing it up over his shoulder, and things that you might do if you were a little kid playing against big guys on a playground, but probably never would if you're just playing traveling team basketball all the time. I wonder if because he's not maybe a guy that's you would think of as a scorer. I mean, normally speaking, he's just sort of a pass-first point guard, but it's weird that suddenly in the last minute he kind of has that mentality. But I think the other thing is the guys who just get their mind set that they're going to be the guy to do it are often the kind of guys who dribble it off their shoe. I think he has an open mind about it and doesn't force it. Because I think, like you pointed out in your story, he probably would have passed it to Denman if Denman's man helped off on that last play.
But I also think he's also confident enough in himself to take that shot. I think for a kid to come from Delaware and average, around 10 points a game at Delaware and decide to transfer and think, I'm going to go play in the Big 12, takes a certain level of confidence. And he obviously thought he could do that to put himself in that position to come here. And then immediately he's a starter and one of the most important guys on their team. He's really been, I think, as valuable as anybody that Mike Anderson has brought into this program, with the exception of Damari Carroll and JT Taylor. And that's pretty high praise over the last 4 years. So he isn't a guy that's a natural scorer, and he really doesn't do anything great, but he does a lot of things well, and he's been a great presence on this team.
The other major development of the last week is Justin Safford tears his ACL. They're still kind of seeming to be monkeying around with this, acting like he might come back, which seems pretty far-fetched. But how have you seen them change without him, and maybe going forward, how will that affect Missouri's chances to get much done?
Well, I think so far they've done a fairly good job without him, in that they had a chance to win on the road at Kansas State if they'd shot the ball a little bit better. Obviously, win last night without him. They've held their own on the glass in both games. They only got out-rebounded by Kansas State by 3, and they actually ended up out-rebounding Iowa State last night, both bigger front lines than they have. And So I think Mike Anderson has to be pleased with that. That said, they're missing his offense for sure because they're left playing Keith Ramsey and Steve Moore along with Lawrence Bowers, and Ramsey and Moore aren't really scorers and haven't done much scoring the last two games. Bowers is the guy that you still look at as maybe an offensive threat along the front line, but he's really struggled the last two games. He's 3 for 17. He's only scored 7 points. He was scoreless against Kansas State, which would have made a big difference probably in the final outcome there. The other problem is that they've relied just on those three guys, and you see Keith Ramsey playing 37 minutes on Saturday and then 41 minutes as the game goes into overtime last night. That's a lot of minutes in this system, but Mike Anderson, I don't think feels comfortable with anybody else, meaning the two freshmen who are sitting on the bench right now, especially in tight games. That's going to be a problem going forward. They're going to have to find a way to get Keith Ramsey some rest because he certainly looked not quite himself last night. He had 6 turnovers in the game, and a lot of them were just sloppy turnovers, maybe just a little bit fatigued.
Although that was at the beginning of the game, which it seems counterintuitive. You'd think it would be at the end. The other thing is, I think when you saw at the very end when they were substituting offense-defense, he's fine with playing 4 guards on offense, but then he would get Bowers in on defense. So I think that's kind of the hang-up here is that to defend these teams, you got to have 2 big guys on the floor at once. He would be content to play offense with 4 guards.
Right, and it's not that Justin Safford wasn't a particularly great defender, but he was a big body, and if you do take him off the floor and you do go with 4 guards, then you're left with Kim English, who isn't necessarily a particularly great defender, guarding a bigger guy, and that's definite mismatch because you've got 3 smaller guys on the floor with him. It's a tough situation.
I think some of us were wondering if this was going to be the cue for the freshmen who never play, Underwood or Stone, to come in and get a few minutes, which really hasn't happened. I think it's safe to say those guys are probably not going to play from here on out.
I mean, Mike keeps suggesting that they could play, but obviously he's not going to them in these situations. And, there was a reason they hadn't played until the Nebraska game a couple weeks ago through Big 12 play. I mean, he's watching these guys every day in practice. He sees what they can contribute. He sees the other options he has, and he's choosing to go with those other options. I think, we can read between the lines what that means.
Well, it kind of leads into another point where rather than talking about whether Safford has any chance to get a few minutes here or there the rest of this year, what about next year? It's no sure thing that people with ACL injuries are going to be anywhere close to full strength 8 months later. Missouri could be in a real pinch as far as their front court. They lose Ramsey. They're not sure yet if Mitchell is going to qualify. If those 2 guys aren't around and Safford's hobbling around, you could have a real problem up front next year.
For sure, and I haven't really been able to get anybody to look at that possibility right now, and I think it's because they're coaching in the here and now, and they're thinking that if we're alive the second week of the NCAA tournament, say, maybe Justin can get out there and give them, 12 minutes a game or something. I don't know if that's really what the thought process is, but that's, the best I can come up with trying to make sense of this right now.
As we said earlier, I think there's really no way Missouri doesn't make the tournament now. They got 10 wins in Big 12 play. What do you think maybe with a home game left against Kansas and then the Big 12 tournament, maybe what's the high end of what they could do as far as NCAA tournaments or the worst?
Well, I think obviously you beat Kansas, that bumps you up a couple notches, I would think, and then you have the tournament as a possibility to make some more noise. And I think they, if they're a 7 right now, which is what generally people are projecting them at, I think they could get up to a 5 probably with a strong finish here, 5 or 6. You don't even have to beat Kansas probably to have a chance at a 6 seed if you can get your way to the semifinals of the conference tournament. They've got some good wins. Kansas State still a really good win and looks better all the time, really. Oklahoma State looks like a better win all the time with the way that they're finishing the season right now. And, they have a chance to win 23 or 24 games, certainly by the time the tournament starts. So you would think they'd be in pretty good shape to get as high as a 6 or possibly even higher, a 5. If things don't go well, they lose to Kansas, and then they end up losing the first round of the Big 12 tournament to Nebraska, which is a possible opponent. Looks like, then they could drop a couple notches, maybe down to an 8 or a 9. But
that would be damaging because obviously when you get to the 8 or 9 line, that's where you're very slim chances of getting out of the first weekend.
Mm-hmm. You want to avoid the number 1 seeds whenever possible, and especially they have the advantage of they're not going to be playing Kansas on the second week or on the second game of a weekend because of the conference affiliations. But I don't think you want to play Syracuse either.
Nope. Nor Kentucky.
Nor Kentucky, particularly with what DeMarcus Cousins can do up front and how depleted Missouri's front line is right now.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, Kansas coming to Missouri on Saturday. Just maybe your thoughts on what Missouri's chances are to compete or win that game based on, obviously when they went to Kansas, it was not a competitive game.
Well, I think they're not very good from what I've seen between the two teams.
Their chances aren't very good.
Their chances aren't very good. I think, there's a reason that I still think, Kansas is number 2 right now, but I still think they're the best team in the country across the board in terms of their personnel and what they can do. Missouri did not match up well in Lawrence. Now, crazy things have happened. They've won games in Columbia that you can't figure out how they've won over the years, and especially the last few years. But I think this is a different animal. I think one of the things that did go well when they met in Lawrence was Justin Safford scored 19 points. Now, it wasn't an efficient 19 points, but he still was one of the few guys willing to attack Aldrich a little bit, make him move around, get out of the paint, get him in some foul trouble. They don't have him now. Lawrence Bowers is struggling. They don't have another offensive threat up front right now to make Aldrich move around, and therefore anybody who's driving to the basket is not only dealing with the guy guarding them, they're dealing with the big man waiting to block their shot or alter their shot, and he's, as we've seen time and again, he's as good as anybody in the country at doing that.
Yeah, I think that's the whole deal. They got to get him in foul trouble and get him out of the game, and to do that, they can't alter their own shots to avoid getting blocked by him. I think they got to take it to him and hope they get some calls, and then if he's on the bench, then I think they do have a good chance. But as long as he's out there, it's going to be tough. Mm-hmm.
And even when he's not out there, you're right, they have a chance, but you're still talking about a team that has Marcus Morris up front. Sharon Collins, I know people say he's struggled this year, but you've seen what the guy has done the last 4 years. He's one of the best guards the Big 12 has ever had. I don't think you can argue that with the number of shots he's made over the time. He's a clutch player. And so I think it's a tough matchup, no matter what.
I mean, let's be realistic. Kansas would not have recruited anyone on Missouri's roster. Would not have.
Yeah. For sure.
So they should be better at every position by that logic. But we've seen it numerous times in the last 15 years when Kansas was definitely the superior team that weird things do happen.
And Mike Anderson has gotten these guys. I mean, they've really been blown out one time all season. They've been in every other game. Their second worst loss was last weekend against Kansas State by 10 points, and it's a 4 or 5 point game in the last 2.5 minutes. I mean, they're competitive in every game. They play hard. They get the most out of what they have. It's just this is the best team that they've played all season.
All right, well, tune in next week, and we will talk a little bit about the Big 12 tournament coming up.